My brother's fiancée physically attacked me and left me hurt. Later, my brother sent me a message saying, "Keep away from us." I simply replied, "Okay." After that, I removed myself as a guarantor on their new house loan. And now, their mortgage application has been rejected. Sarah had never thought much about how ordinary afternoons could shift the ground beneath someone's feet. Her life followed a predictable pattern. She worked her stable job at a mid-sized insurance company, had recently finished paying off her small but cozy home in the suburbs, and maintained a quiet, self-sufficient routine. She was not the type who looked for trouble, and even less the type who enjoyed family drama. Yet, family had a way of finding you, whether you liked it or not. Her younger brother Michael had always been something of a contradiction. Brilliant in school, full of potential, but forever one step behind when it came to managing adult responsibilities. He was the reason Sarah had learned the nuances of financial documents, loan guarantees, and interest rates years before her peers even considered such things. When Michael had decided to buy a house with his fiancée Amanda, it was Sarah who had stepped in to help push the paperwork through. She had not thought twice about agreeing to co-sign as a guarantor. After all, Michael was family. That was what family did. Or so she had believed. That Saturday afternoon was meant to be a casual visit. Amanda had insisted Sarah come by to see the progress they had made decorating their new home. Sarah had brought a modest housewarming gift, a vase, something tasteful but neutral enough to avoid assumptions of sentimentality. Amanda greeted her at the door with a polite but strained smile. Michael hovered in the background, quieter than usual. The house was beautiful. Sarah had to admit, newly painted walls, carefully chosen furniture, and a faint scent of fresh flowers that suggested Amanda had been preparing for this visit more than she let on. They made small talk at first. Michael offered coffee. Amanda showed off the kitchen cabinets, and Sarah nodded along, offering words of encouragement that felt increasingly hollow as the minutes stretched. Then, somewhere between a comment about countertop finishes and the logistics of moving furniture, the mood shifted. Amanda's tone changed first. Subtle at first, an edge creeping into her words when Sarah mentioned the financial strain of homeownership. Amanda's face tightened. She made a comment, light on the surface but barbed underneath, about how some people like to insert themselves into other people's decisions under the guise of help. Michael looked down at his coffee, saying nothing. Sarah, caught off guard, tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground, but Amanda seemed determined to dig deeper. Her words sharpened, implying things Sarah had never heard said aloud before, that her involvement had always come with strings, that Michael did not need her protection, that maybe it was time Sarah stopped acting like a second parent. It was not a fight, not exactly. No voices were raised. No accusations flew across the room, but the discomfort grew thick enough to choke on. Michael's silence was louder than any argument could have been. Sarah felt it settle between them like a door closing. "I think I should go," Sarah said, standing up slowly. Amanda did not stop her. Michael did not either. Sarah set the vase carefully on the counter before she left. She said nothing more, and neither did they. The drive home was quiet. The streets of the neighborhood blurred together in soft shades of green and gray, suburban calm wrapping itself around her like insulation against the world. She replayed the conversation in her head, trying to understand how such small words had built such an undeniable wall between them. When she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Short, cold, keep away from us. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. There were things she could say, things she could explain, years of history she could throw back in his face. Sacrifices, late nights, emergency loans, all the ways she had pulled him back on the brink while Amanda played house and pretended none of it existed. But what would be the point? Instead, Sarah typed 2 letters. Simple. Final. Okay. She set the phone down and went inside. The house greeted her with its familiar stillness. No angry voices. No tension wrapped in politeness. No waiting for someone else's gratitude to validate her choices. Just her in the quiet and the knowledge that something had shifted, maybe for good. Sunday passed without a word. Monday arrived with its usual rhythm. Coffee, emails, polite exchanges at work. Sarah felt oddly detached from it all, as though watching her life from a distance. She answered questions, met deadlines, but beneath it all, her mind worked in slow, deliberate circles around what had happened. By Wednesday, she had made her decision. She took an early lunch break and drove to the bank where she had signed the guarantee papers for Michael's mortgage. The building was cold in the way all financial institutions were, designed to make you feel small, humble, and grateful for the chance to do business. Sarah sat across from a woman with a nameplate reading Linda Whitaker, senior loan officer, and explained what she needed. "I would like to be removed as guarantor on the mortgage for this property." She slid the papers across the desk, precise and calm. Linda frowned. "That is a significant change. May I ask why?" Sarah smiled, polite but firm. "Personal reasons. I understand the consequences." Linda nodded slowly, flipping through the file. "This will require a full reassessment of the primary applicant's financial standing. If they cannot qualify on their own, the loan may not proceed." "I understand," Sarah said again. Forms were signed. Procedures were explained. By the time Sarah left the bank, the weight on her chest had begun to lighten. Not gone, not yet, but lighter. She had not told Michael or Amanda what she was doing. There was no need. They had asked her to stay away. She was simply honoring their request in the most definitive way she knew. That evening, as she settled into her usual spot on the couch with a book and a glass of wine, Sarah felt something unexpected creep in around the edges of her thoughts. Not sadness, not guilt, relief. For the first time in years, she was not waiting for Michael to call with a new problem for her to fix. She was not carrying the weight of his choices. She had said, "Okay," and now she was free to mean it. A small, quiet freedom, but hers nonetheless, and she had no intention of giving it back. Michael's message had stayed with Sarah longer than she expected. Not the words themselves. Those were simple enough to interpret, but the chill behind them. "Keep away from us." As if she had been the problem all along. As if her quiet, consistent presence had somehow poisoned something between them. It was absurd on its face, but Sarah had no desire to argue anymore. She had made her decision, and now she would see it through. Days passed, then a week. Work carried on as usual. Sarah found herself more focused, oddly liberated from the weight of Michael's life pressing on her shoulders. There was no more worrying about whether he had paid his bills on time, no more late-night calls about sudden financial surprises. Her evenings belonged solely to her again. A quiet dinner, a book, maybe a long walk to the neighborhood where no one expected anything from her beyond a polite nod. Then, on a Saturday morning, her phone rang. It was not Michael. It was Amanda. For a moment, Sarah considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or perhaps a sliver of unresolved irritation, won out. She answered with a neutral tone. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, the kind where someone is trying to decide how much pride they are willing to sacrifice. "Sarah, this is Amanda. I need to ask you something." Sarah waited. "I got a call from the bank," Amanda continued. Her words rushed and brittle. "Something about the mortgage being suspended. I do not understand what is going on. Michael's been difficult to talk to lately. Did something happen with the loan?" Sarah kept her answer measured. "I requested to be removed as guarantor." A silence stretched between them. Then Amanda's voice sharpened. Colored with frustration Sarah recognized too well. "You what?" "I asked to be removed," Sarah repeated, still calm. "It was within my rights. The bank is reassessing the loan without my income involved." "But why now? After everything's been approved, after we've moved in, why would you do this?" Sarah's patience thinned. "Because I do not want to be tied to your mortgage. Amanda, it is as simple as that. I thought Michael made that clear." Amanda exhaled, a sound halfway between disbelief and exhaustion. "He told me you were upset about something, but he did not say you were pulling out a loan." "I was not upset. I was disrespected," Sarah said, her voice flattening. "There is a difference." Another pause. "So that's it? You're just washing your hands of this?" "Yes." Amanda hung up without another word. The following Thursday, Sarah received a formal letter from the bank confirming her removal as guarantor and noting the couple's application had been placed under review. She filed the letter away with a strange sense of closure. Whatever came next was no longer her concern, but she underestimated just how quickly consequences unfolded. By the weekend, Michael showed up on her doorstep. He did not knock at first. Sarah heard his car pull up and watched him behind the curtain as he sat there, engine idling, face him behind his hands on the steering wheel. Minutes passed. Finally, the car door opened, and he climbed out like someone approaching a cliff's edge. When the doorbell rang, Sarah was already there to meet it. "You shouldn't have come," she said, holding the door half closed between them. "I didn't know what else to do." Michael looked older somehow, though it had only been weeks. "Amanda's furious. She thinks I knew you were going to pull out. Did you tell her I asked for space? That you told me to stay away?" His gaze faltered. "Not exactly." "Then maybe that's where you should start." Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly unraveling. "The bank's freezing the loan. Amanda's parents can't help. We're stuck." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, unmoved. "That's unfortunate. You can't just undo this." "I can. I did. Legally and finally." "Sarah." "No." She stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her, so there was no confusion about boundaries. "You asked me to stay away. I am honoring that. You can't have it both ways." Michael's frustration burned beneath the surface. "You're my sister, and for 30 years, I've acted like it. I co-signed your loans, bailed you out of leases, floated you through layoffs. I did it because I thought I was helping, but all I was doing was letting you believe there would always be someone to clean up after you. That's not fair. It's the truth." He looked away, jaw tightening. "Amanda's blaming me for this, for needing you in the first place. Then maybe you should look at why you needed me." Michael swallowed hard. "We can't keep the house without you. That's not my problem anymore." He stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for her to soften, but Sarah remained steady, her resolve cooling any hope he might have carried. "You're really done?" "Yes." He nodded, slowly. "Okay." And then he left. The next time Sarah heard about them, it was through a mutual acquaintance from work. Word spread quickly in small suburban circles. The house deal had fallen through. Michael and Amanda had given notice at their rental, thinking they would be in their new home by now. Without the loan, without anywhere else lined up, they were couch surfing between Amanda's distant relatives and friends who could spare a spare room for a week or two. Amanda's job performance had slipped. The stress showed in ways that only gossip could amplify. Michael was quieter, more withdrawn, less visible in the places he used to frequent. Sarah did not seek these updates, but they found her all the same, floating on the current of small-town conversation. She did not gloat. She did not feel triumphant. If anything, she felt neutral, as if this unraveling had been inevitable long before she stepped away. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, she ran into Laura, an old friend who had remained loosely connected to both Sarah and Michael through the years. They exchanged pleasantries over the produce section before Laura lowered her voice, curiosity shining through polite restraint. "I heard about Michael and Amanda. Must be hard for you, watching them struggle." "I don't watch," Sarah said simply. Laura tilted her head. "Amanda didn't know, about the guarantor thing. Michael never told her how much he needed you to get the loan." Sarah paused. "Really? She thought he handled it all himself. You know how he is, prideful about appearances. I guess that's why she snapped at you that day." She didn't understand the whole picture. Sarah considered this. It did not change her actions or her feelings, but explained something about Amanda's hostility, about Michael's silence. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Laura shrugged. "Sometimes people don't see who's holding them up until they're already falling." The conversation lingered with Sarah as she finished her shopping. Amanda's words echoed differently now, colored by ignorance rather than malice. Still, the outcome remained the same. Sarah had stepped back. The collapse belonged to them, not her. That night, as she sat with her quiet dinner in her quiet house, Sarah thought about how one small word, okay, had become a boundary no one could cross anymore. A simple answer that had closed a door and opened another. For the first time in a long time, she wondered what she might build for herself, now that she was no longer busy propping up someone else. Sarah did not waste time dwelling on what had already been said or done. She had always been pragmatic, and now that she had made her decision, she had no intention of second-guessing it. The job wasn't glamorous. Stocking shelves, unloading trucks, cleaning up after customers too careless to pick up after themselves. But it was steady, and steady was something he hadn't had in months. The manager, a woman named Linda with sharp eyes and sharper tongue, didn't bother with niceties. Show up on time, work hard, don't steal. You'll keep the job. That's it. Michael nodded. Understood. His first paycheck was smaller than he'd hoped, but enough to cover another week at the motel and keep his phone connected. He marked a milestone with a lukewarm sandwich from a vending machine and a bottle of water. Small victories, he told himself, were still victories. Amanda heard about the job through mutual acquaintances. It made her feel something she couldn't quite name. Not relief, not pride, but perhaps the fragile beginnings of hope. He was trying, finally, not because someone was pushing him, but because there was no one left to do the pushing. They didn't speak. Not yet. Some distances needed time before they could be crossed without reopening wounds. Sarah, for her part, remained steady in her silence. She heard whispers of Michael's progress through the same tangled network of mutual friends and casual connections that kept her informed of Amanda's absence from work. She noted the information without reaction. She had said all there was to say. The rest wasn't hers to manage. Instead, she focused on her own life. She booked a trip, a small one, just a weekend in the mountains, but something for herself, a promise kept. She started attending a yoga class at the community center. Not because she loved it, but because it forced her to be present in her body in a way she hadn't been for years. She painted a room in her house of colors she liked, bright and bold against the neutral tones of the rest. Little rebellions, quiet affirmations. Her world didn't revolve around Michael anymore. It didn't revolve around anyone but her. Yet, when she passed the store where he worked one afternoon, she paused. Through the window, she saw him stacking cans, methodical, focused. He didn't see her. She didn't go inside. She walked on, her steps light, her heart steady. He was finding his way, slowly, clumsily, but without her hand, holding his. That was enough. One rainy afternoon, Sarah found herself in a small coffee shop on the edge of town, the kind of place she rarely visited, but where the warm light and softness of conversation provided a welcome respite from the quiet solitude of her home. She had just met with a client and was waiting for her drink when a familiar voice called her name. Sarah? She turned to see Laura, an old mutual friend of both her and Michael's, stepping inside, shaking off a light drizzle. They hadn't spoken in months, and their interactions had always been brief and somewhat guarded, but today, Laura's expression was open, almost hesitant. Mind if I join you? Laura asked, already sliding into the seat across from Sarah before she could respond. Sarah nodded, setting her cup down. Of course. Laura glanced out the window as the rain pattered softly. I've been meaning to talk to you about everything. Michael and Amanda, the house. What happened? Sarah exhaled slowly. It's been a difficult time. Laura nodded. I'm not here to judge. I think you should know something. Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious. Amanda didn't know the full story. Not the part about you being the guarantor. She thought Michael handled it all himself. That he was the one making the decisions, signing the papers, taking responsibility. Sarah blinked, the information settling in like an unexpected weight. She didn't know? No. Michael kept it from her. She was angry at you, sure. Felt like you were interfering, trying to control things. But she never realized how much you were carrying on his behalf. Sarah folded her hands, staring into her coffee cup. That explained a lot. Laura leaned forward, lowering her voice. I think that's part of why things got so tense between you two that day. Amanda was defending her place in Michael's life, and you were standing in the way, even if unintentionally. Sarah looked up, meeting Laura's gaze. I never wanted to be a wedge. I just wanted honesty, responsibility, something neither of them seemed willing to give. Exactly, Laura said softly. Amanda was trying to build a life with Michael, believing he was in control. When she found out the truth, that he relied on you for everything, it shattered her trust. Sarah nodded slowly. Trust that I never had either. There was a pause, the kind that carries more meaning than words can. I've been thinking, Laura continued, about how family can sometimes be the hardest to understand. You love them, but the lines get blurred. People expect things from you that you don't owe. And when you finally set limits, it feels like betrayal. Sarah smiled faintly. It's a difficult balance. Maybe that's why your simple okay had such an impact. It wasn't just a word. It was a boundary drawn in the sand. A clear line saying, I'm done carrying you. Sarah sighed. It was the only way to protect myself. Laura reached across the table, briefly touching Sarah's hand. I'm sorry you had to be the one to say it, but sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people closest to us. They talked a little longer, sharing memories and quiet understanding before parting ways. As Sarah stepped back into the rain, she felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. For so long, she had seen the situation only through her own eyes, focused on the burden she bore and the frustration of being unappreciated. Now, hearing Amanda's side, the confusion, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, added layers she hadn't fully grasped before. It didn't change her decision. It didn't erase the years of sacrifice, but it helped her see the full picture. Later that evening, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the rain wash over the streets. She thought about Amanda, about Michael, about the fragile threads that had tied them all together in a web of expectations and silence. She thought about trust, how easily it could be broken, and how difficult it was to rebuild. And she thought about herself, not as a guarantor, the rescuer, the one who fixed everyone's problems, but as Sarah, whole, separate, free. She knew there was no going back to what had been. But maybe, just maybe, there could be a way forward. Michael sat on a worn bench in the small park near his motel, the autumn leaves swirling around him as a cold breeze whispered through the trees. He pulled his jacket tighter, trying to hold on to whatever warmth he could find. The past months had been a blur of uncertainty and regret, but today felt different. Today, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running from his mistakes. He was ready to face them. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from an old colleague, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, but who had recently reached out offering help with job leads. Michael typed a quick thank you, grateful for the lifeline, however fragile. He thought about Sarah. For days after Michael's unannounced visit, she kept her routine intact, showing up to work, exchanging small pleasantries with co-workers, and spent her evenings the same quiet way she always had. The storm had passed. The echoes of Amanda's voice and Michael's silent blame no longer lingered in the air around her. What remained was only the simple fact that she had finally drawn a line and kept it. But life had its way of testing boundaries. A week after Michael's visit, Sarah received a letter from the bank, not just confirming her removal as guarantor, but outlining the next steps for the reassessment of Michael and Amanda's loan. Attached to it, almost as an afterthought, was a notice that the couple's financing had been formally suspended pending further review. The letter was clinical, full of financial terms and timelines, but its message was clear. Without her, they were likely going to lose the house. Sarah folded the papers and placed them in the drawer with the others. That was no longer her concern. Yet something inside her shifted, not with guilt, but with finality. This wasn't about punishing Michael or Amanda. This was about finally respecting her own limits. A few days later, she scheduled an appointment at the bank, this time not as anyone's guarantor or financial savior, but simply as herself. Sitting across from a new loan officer, she reviewed her own accounts, her investments, her mortgage status. She asked about opportunities for refinancing, potential upgrades, ways she might better secure her future. The conversation was refreshing, a rare moment where her finances were discussed purely in relation to her own life, her own choices, without the weight of someone else's failures looming over her. As she signed a few minor adjustment papers, She realized how long it had been since she had made a decision that benefited no one but herself. No compromises, no rescues, no half-promises whispered through clenched teeth at family gatherings. Just clarity. The weekend arrived without event. Sarah took it upon herself to reorganize her home, not out of necessity, but from a quiet desire to reclaim her space. She cleared closets, donated old clothes, boxed up things she no longer needed. Among the discarded items, she found a box of papers from a year she had first co-signed for Michael. Loan documents, printed emails, receipts from frantic trips to fix his car when he couldn't afford the repairs himself. Looking at it now, it felt like evidence from a life she no longer lived. She shredded most of it, watching the pages dissolve into meaningless ribbons. When she finished, she opened a bottle of wine and sat on her porch, letting the evening settle in soft and slow. Across the street, neighbors tended to their lawns. Children chalked uneven lines on the sidewalks, and the world remained beautifully indifferent to her quiet transformation. The following Monday brought a small surprise. Her manager, Robert, called her into his office not with the usual strained politeness reserved for quarterly reviews, but with something resembling genuine enthusiasm. "We're restructuring some of the regional teams," he explained, "and your name came up. In a good way." Sarah listened as he outlined a potential promotion, a slight shift in responsibility that would place her as a regional supervisor, overseeing a handful of smaller branches in addition to her current workload. It wasn't a dramatic leap, but it was recognition, the kind she hadn't realized she had stopped expecting. "You've been steady through some tough quarters," Robert added. "Reliable. That counts for something." Reliable. The words settled over her like an old coat, familiar but no longer suffocating. She accepted the offer, not because she needed a validation, but because it aligned with quiet promise she had made to herself. To move forward, to build something solid beneath her own feet. That night, she allowed herself a small indulgence, a new piece of furniture, a reading chair she had admired for months but never felt justified in purchasing. She arranged in the corner of her living room, a symbol of sorts, not of extravagance but of intention, a chair just for her, in a home that was wholly her own. Meanwhile, Michael remained a shadow on periphery. Through casual mentions from mutual acquaintances, Sarah learned he and Amanda were struggling more openly now. Amanda had confided in a co-worker that she felt trapped, burdened by financial uncertainties and Michael's growing silence. They had moved twice already, chasing the dwindling goodwill of extended family and friends. Amanda's frustration was no longer contained behind strained smiles. It spilled into whispered complaints and visible fatigue. Sarah did not reach out. She understood, perhaps more than anyone, the danger of stepping back into that orbit too soon. Some lessons needed to be learned without the safety net of a sister's intervention. One evening, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Sarah?" Amanda's voice, strained but composed. "I know I shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know. Michael's been trying to get a loan without telling me. He's been rejected. Twice." Sarah said nothing. "I found out through the bank. He used my name, thinking he could work it out and surprise me, fix everything himself. But it's worse now. We're not in a good place." "I am sorry to hear that," Sarah said, her tone polite but distant. Amanda sighed. "He's not the man I thought he was. Or maybe he is, and I just didn't want to see it." There was a pause where Amanda seemed to debate saying more. When she finally spoke, her words carried a weariness Sarah recognized too well. "I know you're done with this. I respect that. I just wanted you to understand. I didn't know. Not about any of it. Not really." "I believe you," Sarah said quietly. Amanda thanked her, more out of habit than sincerity, and hung up. Sarah placed the phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. The darkness settled around her like a comfort she had earned. She thought of Michael, of Amanda, of all the tangled lines that had bound them together for so long. They were fraying now, snapping under weight of things unsaid and undone. She did not feel pity. She did not feel vindication. What she felt was distance, clean and necessary. At work, the days grew busier. New responsibilities demanded her attention. fresh challenges that required her full focus. Her colleagues began to treat her differently, recognizing the authority in her voice, the certainty in her decisions. She found satisfaction not in their approval, but in the knowledge that she had earned this space on her own terms. One afternoon, while organizing files for a presentation, she came across a note she had written to herself months earlier, just a scribble on a post-it, almost forgotten. "You do not owe anyone your stability." She smiled, folded the note in half, and placed it in her wallet, a quiet reminder, tucked away where only she could see it. The seasons shifted. Trees shed their leaves, mornings grew colder, and the world moved on in its steady rhythm. Sarah moved with it, no longer tethered to someone else's chaos, no longer waiting for the next request, the next apology, the next impossible favor. Her life, finally, was hers alone, and it had never felt more certain. Amanda sat at the edge of the mattress in her cousin's cramped guest room, her hands clenched so tightly around her phone that her knuckles ached. She had been staring at the email from the bank for over an hour, reading the words again and again, as though repetition might change their meaning. Suspended. Reassessment required. Financial qualifications insufficient, without guaranteed support. Michael was pacing across the small room behind her, arms crossed, his jaw set in that silent, stubborn way he always defaulted to when things slipped out of control. Amanda watched him to the mirror, leaning awkwardly against the far wall. He looked pale, thinner maybe, definitely older than he had just a month ago. "You need to call them," Amanda said, though she already knew the answer. "I've called them 3 times this week. They aren't budging." "Then we need to figure out another solution. We can't keep living like this." Michael stopped pacing and turned to face her. His expression was brittle. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't tried?" Amanda flinched but held her ground. "I'm not blaming you. I'm saying we have to face the facts. Without Sarah's income on the paperwork, we're not getting that house. We're not getting any house. Not right now." Michael sank into the worn-out desk chair in the corner, elbows on knees, head bowed. "She's really done with me. With us." Amanda's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "She was never supposed to be part of us. That was your mistake. Hiding it from me, making it her problem in the first place." "She offered," Michael muttered, though the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "No, she didn't." Amanda's voice softened. "You asked. You pushed. Maybe not with words, but with expectations. You've been leaning on her your whole life." She finally realized it. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Amanda turned her gaze back to her phone, to the lifeless words on the screen. "I thought we were building something," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I thought we were ready." Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. Later that night, Amanda sat alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the gaps where conversation used to be. She pulled out a notepad and began scribbling numbers, budgets, scenarios. Nothing added up. Even if they broke the lease on the rental early, even if they cut every expensive bone, they couldn't save enough fast enough to make a difference. They had burned through goodwill already, friends, family, favors stretched thin. Amanda's parents had given all they could without risking their own stability, and Michael's parents, well, they hadn't been an option for years. She thought of Sarah then, of the calm, unshakable way she had drawn her boundary and stuck to it. Amanda envied her in a way she hadn't before. There was strength in knowing where your responsibility ended. The next morning, Amanda called her boss and asked for reduced hours. Not out of necessity. Her job wasn't in immediate danger, but because she couldn't keep performing at full speed with this much weight pressing down on her. She needed breathing room to think, to plan. Her boss, surprisingly, agreed. "You've been distracted," he said, not unkindly. "Get your house in order. We'll be here when you're ready." Amanda wanted to laugh at the phrase. Get your house in order. If only it were that simple. When she told Michael about the reduced hours, he reacted as she expected. His frustration flared, not because of the money. They weren't exactly swimming in income as it was, but because it felt like one more thing slipping through his fingers. "You're giving up," he accused. "No, I'm adjusting." There's a difference. We should be fighting harder. Amanda set her jaw. We should be thinking smarter. There's no fight left to win here. Not this way. Their days fell into a weary routine after that. Amanda picked up freelance work where she could. Michael haunted job boards and sent out resumes like offerings to a silent god. They spoke less, argued more. Small things sparked too easily. The way Michael left dishes in the sink, the way Amanda sighed too loudly when scrolling through their dwindling bank account. And beneath it all, Sarah's absence loomed. Not her presence, not her interference, but the cold, undeniable fact that she was no longer there to catch them when they fell. One afternoon, Amanda found herself driving aimlessly, ending up in front of the house they had almost owned. The for sale sign was back up, a fresh banner hanging beneath it. Financing required. She sat there for a long time, engine running, radio silent. She thought of the conversations they had in that living room, the plans they had whispered to each other across the bare floors. She had imagined children there, holidays, quiet mornings with coffee and sunlight through the windows. Now it belonged to someone else's future. When she returned to the guest room, Michael was waiting. "I called Sarah," he said without preamble. Amanda's heart sank. "Why?" "I thought maybe if she understood how bad things are, she'd change her mind." Amanda didn't need to ask how the conversation had gone. Michael's expression told her everything. She said no. Of course she had. Amanda sat down heavily on the bed, pressing her palms to her temples. "You can't keep doing this. I don't know what else to do. You can start by accepting that this isn't her responsibility, or mine alone. It's yours. It always has been." Michael's shoulders sagged. "I thought I could fix it before you noticed, before anyone knew. That's the problem. You were never supposed to fix it alone. You were supposed to build it with me, with honesty, with respect. You hid things because you didn't want to look weak. But now we're both drowning because you wouldn't admit you needed help the right way." For the first time in weeks, Michael didn't argue. Amanda stood, gathering her things with quiet finality. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. Clear my head. Figure out what I want. I can't do that here, watching you spiral and waiting for another shoe to drop." Michael didn't stop her. He just nodded, as though he had finally run out of fight. When Amanda left, Michael sat alone in the dim room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the ghost of a future slipping through his fingers. He pulled out his phone, stared at Sarah's last message to him, the one word that had started this unraveling. "Okay." It echoed now with a weight he hadn't understood before. Not anger, not dismissal, just finality. A door closed, a boundary drawn, and for the first time, Michael wondered if Sarah had been right all along. Sarah had never realized how deeply ingrained Michael's dependence on her had become until she finally stepped away. In those first few weeks after cutting the financial tie, she had been too focused on reclaiming her space, her time, her quiet routines. It was only now, as the dust settled, that she began to see the patterns for what they were. Michael had been calling her in small ways since they were children, not always with words, but with expectations. When their father left, it was Sarah who had taken on the silent role of protector, the one who steadied their mother, who shielded Michael from the sharpest edges of adulthood. When bills needed paying, when school deadlines loomed, when he couldn't face the consequences of his own mistakes, it had been Sarah stepping forward, smoothing the path ahead. What she once thought of as loyalty, she now recognized as something more complex, enabling, perhaps. A quiet agreement neither of them had ever spoken aloud, but both had honored for years. She would catch him, and he would fall, over and over. Now, alone with her thoughts and her reclaimed autonomy, Sarah wondered why it had taken her so long to realize that love did not require sacrifice on this scale. That boundaries were not cruelty. That saying no was not abandonment. One evening, as autumn pressed colder against her windows, Sarah sat with a photo album she hadn't opened in years. Childhood birthdays, graduations, the awkward years where Michael had seemed to grow in spurts while Sarah stayed steady, predictable. In every picture, there was a thread of something unspoken in Michael's posture, in his expression, a quiet leaning toward her, an expectation that she would always be the one holding the frame steady. She thought of the moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now glowed with meaning in retrospect. The time Michael had overdrafted his account and called her in a panic, and she had wired money without question. The time he lost his first apartment and moved into her guest room without ever asking if it was truly convenient. The time he brought Amanda to dinner, already talking about marriage, and Sarah had known that he hadn't told Amanda half the truth about his financial life. And she had let it go, because that was what she did. Until now, her okay had not been an act of anger. It had been an act of exhaustion, a surrender, not to Michael's expectations, but to her own need for peace. That realization brought no regret, only clarity. On Saturday, she met with an old friend, Rachel, for coffee. Rachel had been there through many of the years when Sarah's life revolved around Michael's crises. They settled into their usual corner of the cafe, 2 steaming mugs between them. And after polite catch-up of work and weather, Rachel leaned in with the kind of directness only long friendships allowed. "You seem lighter," Rachel said. "What changed?" Sarah hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. "I stopped saving someone who didn't want to be saved." Rachel smiled, not unkindly. "About time." They talked for hours, not about Michael but about Sarah, her plans, her quiet promotion, the trip she might finally take now that her calendar wasn't filled with someone else's emergencies. It felt like reclaiming more than time. It felt like reclaiming herself. Driving home, Sarah realized something else had shifted. For the first time in years, her future felt like a door she could open, not a hallway she had to walk just to keep others from falling behind. Yet even as she moved forward, echoes of the past found her. At work, a colleague mentioned seeing Michael around town, looking drawn, distracted, thinner than usual. Amanda, apparently, had taken some time away, vague rumors of staying with family, of rethinking things. Sarah listened without reaction. It was no longer her burden. Still, the knowledge settled somewhere in the back of her mind, not guilt, but awareness. One afternoon, while clearing old files from her home office, Sarah came across the original paperwork for Michael's mortgage. Her name printed neatly beside his, her signature beside his, a document that had tied them together more tightly than blood for far too long. She didn't shred it. Not yet. Instead, she filed away with a note to herself, written in steady ink across the folder. Never again. Later, as she prepared dinner, Sarah thought about the nature of family, how easily love could twist into obligation, how quietly lines blurred between helping and enabling, how sometimes love meant stepping back and letting someone face the consequences they had spent years avoiding. She wondered if Michael had reached that place yet, if he had seen, truly seen, the pattern he had created, if he had recognized that his crumbling house of cards had been built not just on poor decisions, but on the expectation that Sarah would always be there to pick them up. She doubted it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But that wasn't her responsibility anymore. The next weekend, Sarah attended a neighborhood event she had avoided in years past. A block party filled with casual conversations, polite laughter, the kind of small talk she had once thought beneath her time, because there had always been bigger fires to put out elsewhere. Now, she found comfort in the simplicity, in being known as Sarah, the neighbor with the steady job and the quiet house. Not Sarah, the sister perpetually cleaning up someone else's mess. A neighbor mentioned a new family moving into the house Michael and Amanda had nearly bought. Sarah smiled, said she hoped they would be happy there. And she meant it. Returning home that night, she realized something profound. Her life was no longer defined by what she had prevented. It was defined by what she chose. She chose peace. She chose freedom. She chose herself. And for the first time in a long, long while, that was more than enough. Michael sat in the parking lot of the bank long after his appointment had ended. The air conditioning hummed weakly against the early autumn heat, but he barely noticed it. In his hand, the letter trembled slightly. Not because he was surprised. He had been expecting this outcome since the moment Sarah walked away, but because seeing it in writing made it undeniable. Application denied. Loan suspended indefinitely. Financial standing insufficient. The words blurred at the edges as Michael's grip tightened. He leaned back against the headrest, staring at the ceiling of his car as if answers might materialize there, as if all the wrong turns he had taken might suddenly right themselves if he stayed still long enough. He thought about calling Amanda, but couldn't bring himself to. Not yet. Not until he could figure out how to explain, one more time, that he had failed. Instead, he drove, aimlessly at first, through neighborhoods where houses looked like the ones he had almost owned, neat lawns, tidy driveways, lives unfolding in orderly rhythms. He hated them for their normalcy, for the ease he had never been able to grasp. Eventually, he found himself parked outside the rental house he and Amanda had left just weeks earlier, believing they were stepping into something better. A for rent sign hung in the yard again, fresh and bright. He wondered if they could go back. If crawling in defeat to the landlord would buy them time, shelter, dignity. Probably not. Their bridge there had burned quietly, in unpaid utilities and excuses stretched too thin. Michael pressed his forehead to the steering wheel. He was so tired, not just physically. Those sleepless nights were catching up to him, but bone deep, soul worn, tired of chasing after stability he never seemed able to catch. When he finally called Amanda, her silence said more than words could. "I thought you were handling it," she said at last, her voice flat. "I tried. Trying doesn't count anymore." "I know." Amanda sighed, a sound that wasn't angry, just empty. "I'm staying at my sister for now. I need space to think." Michael wanted to ask what there was left to think about, but he bit down on the words. He understood, even if he hated the truth of it. They had built their foundation on half-truths and borrowed strength, and now the cracks had become canyons. The days blurred after that. Michael moved into a friend's spare room, a favor stretched in even as it was offered. He worked odd jobs, temporary gigs that paid just enough to keep his phone active and gas in his car. Each morning, he scanned job board with mounting desperation. Each night, he wondered if this was a bottom, or there was still further fall. One afternoon, he passed Sarah on the street. She didn't see him, or if she did, she gave no sign. She looked different. Not happier, necessarily, but lighter, like someone who had stopped carrying weight that was never hers to begin with. Michael watched her from a distance, shame curling hot in his chest. He thought of all the times he had leaned on her, assumed her help as a given. He thought of how easily she had walked away, how firmly she had drawn that line. Not in anger, not in punishment. In necessity. Later that night, alone in the borrowed room with nothing but the glow of his phone for company, Michael scrolled through old messages from Sarah. There weren't many. They had never been the kind of siblings who exchanged daily texts or long calls. Their communication had always been transactional, help needed, help given. But there it was, the last message, stark and final. Okay, he read it again and again, looking for something more. An opening, a crack in the wall she had built. There was nothing, just the weight of that single word, the full stop it represented. At the bank, his file sat forgotten on a desk, another failed application, in a long line of them. He had no collateral, no savings, no fallback. He had burned through every safety net, except the one he should have built for himself long ago. Amanda stopped returning his calls. Not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. Michael understood. He had nothing left to offer her but apologies, and apologies did not pay rent or repair trust or rebuild futures. He found himself driving past Sarah's house one evening, more out of habit than hope. Lights on, curtains drawn, the shape of her life neat and order behind those walls. He wondered if she thought of him at all, if she worried, if she regretted. Probably not. Sarah had always been good at letting go once she made up her mind. In the following weeks, Michael's world shrank to the size of his immediate needs. A paycheck meant food, gas, another week in the spare room. A missed shift meant another domino tipping closer to collapse. He learned the rhythm of small humiliations, pawn shops, declined cards, polite rejections from jobs beneath even his lowered standards. He thought often of starting over somewhere new, a different city, a clean slate. But starting over required resources he no longer possessed, courage he wasn't sure he had. One morning, after another fruitless round of interviews, Michael sat in his car outside a community center offering free career counseling. He hadn't gone in yet. He wasn't sure if he could face the looks, the paperwork, the long explanations of how he had arrived at this point. But then he remembered Sarah's face the last time they spoke, the steadiness in her eyes, the quiet refusal to rescue him again. Maybe that was what starting over looked like. Not a new place, but a new mindset. He stepped out of the car, pocketed his keys, and walked toward the building. Inside, a woman greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. "Looking for help finding work?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, I'm looking to figure out what comes next." The woman handed him a clipboard. "Start here." As he filled out the forms, Michael realized he had stopped looking for shortcuts. He wasn't here to plead for favors or bypass the hard parts. He was here to build something. Finally, from the ground up. It wasn't redemption. Not yet, but it was a start. Sarah was already up when her doorbell rang. It was early, barely past 8, and she had been in the middle of sorting through old paperwork with a cup of coffee cooling beside her. Saturdays were usually her quiet time, a space for clearing out not just physical clutter, but the lingering noise of her thoughts. She almost ignored the bell, assuming it was a solicitor or someone lost looking for another address. But something pulled her to the door. Through the peephole, she recognized a slumped figure on her porch. Michael. She opened the door just enough to look at him, to gauge whether this was another request wrapped in apology, another attempt to pull her back into the life she had so carefully stepped away from. "What are you doing here?" Her tone was not harsh, but it was firm. Michael looked worse than the last time she had seen him. Eyes hollowed from lack of sleep, clothes rumpled and ill-fitting, the weight of his choices pressing down on his posture like a physical burden. "I need to talk to you." Sarah hesitated before stepping aside. 15 minutes. That's all I can give you." He followed her inside, moving like someone twice his age. She gestured toward the kitchen table, and they sat across from each other with the wary distance of former allies on opposite sides of a war they never wanted to fight. "I'm not here to ask for money," Michael said first, as if he knew that was the only way this conversation would even begin, "or help with the house. I know that's done." Sarah said nothing. She waited. I need to say something. I need you to understand where I'm at." "Then say it." Michael ran a hand through his hair, exhaling like it hurt. "I lost everything. Amanda's gone. The house is gone. I'm living out a friend's spare room until he figures out how to tell me I've overstayed my welcome. I'm working jobs I hate because they're the only ones I can get. And every time I think about how I got here, I land back at you." Sarah's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in careful consideration. "Because I said no. Because you finally said no." Michael's voice wasn't accusatory. It was tired. "I built my life on the idea that you would always catch me. I didn't think about what that meant for you. I didn't think about what it meant for me. I just kept moving forward, assuming you'd keep the ground steady under me. And then one day, you didn't, and everything fell apart." He wasn't crying. He wasn't pleading. He was stating facts, and Sarah listened with a patience born from years of practice. "You're angry," Michael said, "but not for the reasons I thought. You're not angry because I failed. You're angry because I never learned how not to." Sarah leaned back, her coffee untouched beside her. "I'm not angry, Michael. Not anymore. I was exhausted. There's a difference. I see that now. I see a lot of things I should have seen sooner." Silence settled between them again, heavy but not hostile. "So, what do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice even. "Because I don't think you came here just to confess your failures. I want to know how to fix it." Sarah almost laughed, not cruelly, but in disbelief. "Fix what? Your life? Your mistakes? That's not something I can tell you. It's not something I can do for you. You're the only one who can figure that out." Michael nodded, as if he had expected this answer, but needed to hear it anyway. I thought, maybe you could tell me where to start." Sarah considered this. Not a plea for rescue, not a demand. A question, a beginning. "You start," she said slowly, "by accepting that no one is coming to save you. Not me, not Amanda, not anyone. You start by deciding what kind of man you want to be and working toward that every single day, even when it feels pointless. especially when it feels pointless. Michael's hands curled into fists on the table, not in anger, but in frustration at himself. I don't know if I can. You can. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. But not if you're waiting for it to get easy. It won't. Growth isn't comfortable. Change isn't simple. You either face that or you don't. That's the choice. He nodded again, slowly this time, as if the word were sinking in by degrees. I'm sorry, Michael said, for everything. Sarah allowed herself a small breath, a release of tension she hadn't realized she was still carrying. I know, and I accept it. But that doesn't mean we go back to how things were. I won't be your safety net anymore. I can be your sister. I can care about you. But I can't fix you. You have to do that yourself. Michael's shoulders slumped, but there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not hope, exactly. Not yet. But maybe the faintest outline of determination. Thank you, he said, standing, for letting me say this, for hearing me. Sarah stood too, walking him to the door. Take care of yourself, Michael. Truly, because no one else is going to do it for you. He nodded once more, then stepped out into the morning light, leaving Sarah alone in her quiet, ordered home. She watched him go with a strange mix of sadness and relief. This conversation had been necessary, but hadn't been easy. Still, it felt like a closing chapter, or maybe the first line of a new one. Inside, she returned to her paperwork. Her coffee. The sun rose higher, spilling light through her windows, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat down and picked up her pen, not to sign anything for anyone else, but to make a list, not of tasks or obligations, but of dreams, places she wanted to visit, skills she wanted to learn, books she wanted to read, a life she wanted to build for herself and no one else. Outside, the world moved on. So did Sarah. Amanda's decision to leave Michael wasn't made with anger. It wasn't fueled by a climactic fight or a single unforgivable moment. It had been slow, almost silent in its formation, built from months of disappointment layering like sediment until the foundation simply couldn't bear the weight anymore. In the end, she packed 2 suitcases, sent a brief text, and drove to her sister's without looking back. Michael didn't follow. He barely reacted. The days that followed stretched thin for both of them. Amanda settled into her sister's cramped apartment, sleeping on a pull-out couch, telling herself it was only temporary. Her sister, Melanie, didn't ask many questions, which Amanda appreciated. There were only so many times she could rehash the same weary explanation. No, they hadn't been evicted, not technically. No, there was another place waiting. Yes, she had known things were bad, but not how bad. Not until it was too late. Amanda's job began to suffer in small, noticeable ways. Deadlines she would have once met without effort now loomed like cliffs she had no energy to scale. Meetings blurred into one another, her contributions muted by exhaustion. Her supervisor, a woman known more for her patience than her warmth, called Amanda into her office one afternoon and closed the door gently behind her. "You've been distracted," she said without preamble, "and I'm not unsympathetic. But this can't continue indefinitely." Amanda nodded, unable to summon a defense. "Take the rest of the week. Figure out your next steps. When you're ready to come back ready." It wasn't a firing, but it felt like the first step towards something like it. Amanda packed up her desk with mechanical movements, conscious of her co-workers' careful avoidance of eye contact. Sympathy could curdle fast in professional spaces. Back at Melanie's, she lay awake into the small hours, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster as if they could reveal answers. Her phone buzzed occasionally, perfunctory check-ins from friends growing less frequent, more awkward. Michael hadn't called in days. A part of her wondered if he even realized she was gone. When Sarah's name appeared in a text notification one morning, Amanda hesitated before opening it. They had never been close. Civil, yes, but Sarah had always remained on the outskirts of Amanda's life, observing with cool detachment. The message was short. "I hope you're okay." That was all. No accusation, no judgment. Just those 5 words. Amanda didn't reply right away. Instead, she sat with the message, letting its simplicity settle into the hollow spaces inside her. Someone had thought to ask. Someone who didn't owe her anything. Eventually, she typed out a reply. I'm figuring things out. No response came, but Amanda hadn't expected one. The exchange wasn't about reconnection. It was about acknowledgement. A thread, not a bridge. Michael, meanwhile, fell further into his own isolation. His friend's patience had thinned, as Amanda predicted it would. He moved again, this time into a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions if the rent was paid in cash. His job situation remained precarious. The temporary work dried up as autumn bled into winter. Prospects shrank. Bills accumulated. His phone calls went unanswered more often than not. He didn't blame Amanda for leaving anymore. He didn't blame Sarah for refusing to rescue him. Blame had lost its usefulness. What remained was a gnawing awareness that his life had become smaller than he'd ever imagined possible. A single room, a threadbare bed, meals purchased from gas stations because they were cheaper than groceries and portions he could afford. Some nights he walked aimlessly, circling blocks until his legs ached, avoiding the motel's flickering sign and the suffocating quiet of the room beyond it. He thought of the house often, the one they had almost owned. He imagined it filled with light, with someone else's furniture, someone else's laughter. It hurt less than it used to. One evening, while walking farther than usual, he passed a storefront with a sign in the window. Help wanted. Part-time. No experience necessary. He went inside. Their last conversation echoed in his mind. The moment he admitted how much he depended on her, how blind he'd been to the damage he'd caused. He wished he could go back and undo years of mistakes, but he knew that wasn't possible. All he had now was the choice to move forward. That afternoon, Michael met with a career counselor at the community center. The woman, Martha, listened patiently as he detailed the situation. The lost home, the broken relationships, the pattern of dependence he was desperate to break. You're here because you want change, Martha said kindly. That's the first step. Now, let's figure out what you're good at and what you want to do. They spent hours reviewing Michael's skills, interests, and experience. It wasn't easy. He hadn't thought much about his own strengths in years, focusing instead on what others expected of him. But as they talked, a spark ignited, a small, fragile hope. Over the following weeks, Michael applied for several jobs, each rejection stinging but fueling his determination. He learned to write resumes, to prepare for interviews, to present himself with honesty and humility. At times, the weight of his failures threatened to overwhelm him. There were days when he wanted to give up, to return to old habits, to ask Sarah for help one more time. But each time, he remembered her words, the boundaries she had set, the strength she had shown. He realized that if he wanted to rebuild his life, he had to do it on his own terms. One evening, as he walked home from a late-shift stocking shelves at a local grocery store, Michael passed Sarah's neighborhood. He stopped for a moment, looking up at the house she had worked so hard to make her own. A pang of sadness hit him, but it was tempered by respect. She had chosen herself, and now he needed to choose himself. He sent her a message, not asking for anything, just a simple note. Thank you for everything. I'm working on becoming better. He waited, unsure she would reply. When the response came, just 2 words, he smiled softly. Good luck. Michael tucked the phone into his pocket and continued walking. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, he felt ready to travel it. Alone, yes, but with a newfound sense of responsibility and hope. Michael had expected a conversation filled with pleas and apologies when he finally reached out to Sarah again. Instead, what came was something he hadn't anticipated. A quiet, steady desire not for financial rescue, but for guidance, for a way forward that didn't rely on old patterns of dependency. They met at the small cafe where Sarah sometimes went to work remotely, a place neutral enough to feel safe, but familiar enough to feel personal. Michael arrived first, fidgeting with the strap of his worn backpack, his gaze flickering to the door every few moments. Sarah walked in a little late, her presence calm and composed, carrying an air of someone who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. She smiled politely but didn't rush to embrace him, giving space where space was needed. Thanks for meeting me, Michael said, his voice low, uneven with vulnerability. I'm not here to ask for money or favors. I need to know how to rebuild, to start over, without leaning on anyone else. Sarah studied him for a moment, sensing the sincerity behind the words. That's a good place to start. Michael took a breath. I want to learn. I want to be responsible. But I don't know where to begin. I feel lost. Sarah nodded. It's okay to feel lost. That's part of the process. What you need is a plan, a way to take small, manageable steps towards stability. And you need support that encourages growth, not rescue. They talked for hours, not about what had gone wrong, but about what could be right. Sarah shared resources she had found helpful, a local community college with affordable courses, programs for adults returning to education, workshops on budgeting and credit repair. She suggested counseling options for dealing with stress and rebuilding confidence. Michael listened, absorbing the information like a dry sponge soaking up water. It was overwhelming, but hopeful. For the first time, he felt that responsibility wasn't a weight, but a path. I want to try, he said quietly. Not just for me, but for the people I've hurt. I want to be better. Sarah smiled, a genuine warmth that softened the years of distance between them. That's all anyone can ask. Before they parted, Michael surprised her. Can we keep talking? Not about money, not about debts or mistakes, but about progress, about building a new kind of relationship, one where I'm accountable. Sarah hesitated. It was a big ask, and she had learned to guard her heart carefully. But she also saw something real in Michael's eyes, a commitment she hadn't witnessed before. I'm willing to try, she said. The days that followed brought a cautious reconnection. Their conversations shifted from silence and tension to tentative collaboration. Sarah became a mentor of sorts, offering guidance without judgment, encouragement without enablement. Michael enrolled in a budgeting course recommended by Sarah and began volunteering at a local food bank to rebuild his work ethic and confidence. He started therapy to address deeper issues he had long avoided. Sarah, too, found herself growing in this new dynamic. She learned to set clear boundaries while still offering compassion. She discovered strength in saying no, but also in saying yes, to change, to healing, to hope. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of rebuilding family ties without repeating past mistakes. One evening, after a particularly encouraging therapy session, Michael texted Sarah a photo of a small plant he had started caring for on his windowsill. Growth takes time, he wrote. Sarah replied simply, and patience. Their relationship was no longer defined by debt or dependence, but by mutual respect and a shared journey toward better versions of themselves. Months passed since Michael and Sarah had reconnected, tentatively forging a new relationship grounded in honesty, respect, and clear boundaries. Both had grown in ways neither expected. For Sarah, it was learning to balance care with self-preservation, to nurture hope without sacrificing her own peace. For Michael, it was a slow, steady process of taking responsibility, embracing the discomfort of change, and facing the future without shortcuts. After a week-long community budgeting workshop, Michael surprised Sarah by inviting her to a local open mic night, where he was volunteering to help with setup and logistics. It was a small gesture, but to Sarah, it marked a profound shift. He was taking ownership not just of his finances, but of his time and contributions. They met after the event at a modest diner nearby, the kind of place filled with a hum of low conversations and the scent of strong coffee. Michael looked more at ease than she'd seen him in years. You did good tonight, Sarah said, sipping her tea. Michael smiled. Thanks. It felt good to help, like I was part of something. That's how progress starts, Sarah said. Small steps that add up. They talked about plans, Michael's enrollment at a community college to pursue certification in logistics, his work with local nonprofits, and his therapy sessions that helped him unravel the patterns that had held him back. Amanda was no longer a frequent subject, though they both acknowledged her place in their shared history. Michael was living alone now, renting a modest apartment with the money he earned from part-time jobs and careful budgeting. Sarah had encouraged him to establish his independence fully before attempting to reconnect further with Amanda. For her part, Sarah was embracing her own life's possibilities. Her promotion at work had led to new challenges and opportunities she met with growing confidence. She enrolled in a painting class she had long postponed, discovering a creative outlet that soothed her restless mind. One crisp Saturday morning, Michael stopped by Sarah's house with a small gift, a set of paints and brushes, wrapped in simple brown paper. "For your new hobby," he said, shy but proud. Sarah accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, touched by the gesture. Their conversations were no longer burdened with past grievances, but filled with tentative plans and shared encouragement. Michael began to understand the importance of not leaning too heavily, while Sarah learned the power of forgiveness paired with healthy distance. One afternoon, while working together to organize old family photos in Sarah's living room, Michael found a picture of their childhood. Two young siblings smiling broadly, unburdened by the complexities that would later define their relationship. "I miss this," Michael said softly. Sarah nodded, placing the photo carefully back in the album. "Me too, but we can't go back. We can only move forward." They made an unspoken pact that day, to honor their past without letting it dictate their future. Winter turned to spring, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Michael's grades improved, his job hours increased, and he became an active member of his community, no longer the man who needed saving, but someone contributing meaningfully. Sarah, watching him grow from a distance, felt a quiet pride tempered by realistic caution. They were both still works in progress, but the foundation they were building now was stronger than anything before, one rooted in accountability, respect, and maturity. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of pink and gold, Sarah received a call from Michael. "Hey, I got something to tell you," he said, his voice tinged with excitement and nervousness. "What's up?" Sarah asked. "I'm thinking about getting a place of my own. A small apartment, but it would be mine." Sarah smiled, her heart warming. "That's wonderful, Michael. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Sarah, for everything, for not giving up on me. You did the work. I just held the door open." Their journey was far from over, but the road ahead looked brighter than it had in years. The seasons had shifted again by the time Michael finally moved into his own apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood not far from Sarah's home. It was simple and unpretentious, furnished with second-hand pieces and memories of a life he was determined to rebuild piece by piece. This space was his, not a refuge offered by others, but a home earned through hard work and accountability. Sarah had helped him move in, not by carrying boxes or signing checks, but by offering support that came from trust and respect. They shared a quiet afternoon unpacking, sharing stories, laughter, and silences that no longer carried the weight of past grievances. The walls echoed with possibility instead of tension. Michael stood by the window later that day, looking out over the city lights that twinkled like distant hopes. He felt a sense of calm he had not known for years. This wasn't the life he had imagined in his youth, no grand house or fast success, but it was real and it was his. That evening he sent Sarah a message. "Thank you for everything, for your patience, for your faith, for letting me find my own way." Her reply came swiftly. "You earned it. Proud of you." Sarah, too, was settling into a new rhythm of life. Her promotion had opened doors she once thought closed, and she was exploring opportunities to further her education and pursue passions she had long set aside. The painting class had blossomed into a small circle of friends who admired her quiet strength and thoughtful nature. She often thought back to the day she replied with that simple, "Okay," to Michael's message. How one word, so small, had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It had been a moment of clarity and courage, an act of self-love that allowed her to step back and redefine her role, not just in Michael's life, but in her own. Their family dynamic had transformed. Where once there had been unspoken expectations and silent resentments, now there was communication and mutual respect. Sarah and Michael spoke regularly, sharing milestones and challenges without the undercurrent of old patterns. One afternoon, they sat together at a local park, watching children play and couples stroll by. Michael turned to Sarah and said quietly, "I never want to go back to who I was. I'm building something new." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "And I'll be here, cheering you on from a distance when you need it, but never to carry your burdens again." They understood that true love did not mean endless sacrifice, but healthy boundaries and shared growth. Their relationship was not perfect, but it was real and evolving. The journey had not been easy. There were moments of doubt, setbacks, and painful truths. But through it all, they had learned that sometimes the smallest words carry the greatest power. Okay, had been a door closed, but it had also been a key to freedom, maturity, and a future built on respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the city, Sarah and Michael sat side by side, two siblings walking forward together, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next.